The loudest sound I and Oppos. V ever heard wasn't Oppos. T a scream. It wasn't Oppos. T thunder. It wasn't Oppos. T even a gunshot. It was a single knock from the other side of a door, inside a house that was supposed to be completely empty. And sometimes, late at night, I still wake up wondering what was waiting for us in that room. I was only 10 years old when it happened. My older brother, Luke, was 12, fearless, and always looking for trouble. One warm September night, after our parents tucked us into bed and turned off the lights, Luke climbed through his first-floor bedroom window and whispered for me to follow. A few minutes later, we were sneaking down the street toward the most feared house in our neighborhood. Every kid knew the stories. People claimed they heard footsteps inside when nobody was there. Some swore they saw faces watching from the broken windows. Others said strange lights appeared in the upper rooms long after the house had been abandoned. Most people avoided it. My brother Kuden and Oppos wait to get inside. Armed with nothing but two noisy hand-crank flashlights, we crossed the overgrown yard. The house looked even worse up close. Rotting wood hung from the walls like peeling skin. The windows were shattered. The entire structure leaned slightly to one side, as if it was slowly sinking into the earth. The back door was locked. For a brief moment, I felt relieved. Then Luke picked up a wooden plank from the grass and smashed one of the windows. The crash echoed through the silent neighborhood. Within seconds, he reached inside, unlocked the window, and climbed in. I followed. The moment my feet touched the floor, something felt wrong. The air inside was suffocatingly hot. Not warm. Hot. Like walking into a room that had been sealed with a furnace running for years. Outside was barely 75 degrees. Inside felt closer to 90. Neither of us could explain it. Our flashlights clicked and cranked as we explored the dark rooms. Dust coated everything. Old furniture sat untouched beneath layers of decay. Strangely, there was no graffiti, no signs of vandals, no evidence anyone had entered the house before us. It felt preserved. Waiting. Then we heard it. Crack. A floorboard somewhere above us. We froze. I grabbed Luke and Oppos' sleeve and begged him to leave. And quote, "It and Oppos, that's just an old house," and quote, he whispered. But then another crack echoed from directly overhead. This time even Luke looked uneasy. Slowly, he started climbing the stairs. Every instinct in my body screamed at me not to follow. But being alone downstairs felt worse. At the top of the staircase stood a closed bedroom door. The sound had come from inside. The hallway was completely silent. Luke raised his flashlight and reached for the doorknob. Then he stopped. Without saying a word, he pressed his ear against the wood. I remember holding my breath. I remember the silence. And then, bang! One violent strike exploded from the other side of the door. Not a knock, not a tap. Something slammed into it with enough force to shake the frame. Luke cried out and stumbled backward, clutching his ear. We dropped both flashlights and ran. Idon and Oppos, remember touching the stairs. Idon and Oppos, remember opening the window. 1 second we were inside. The next we were sprinting through the darkness toward home, convinced something was chasing us. Our parents caught us immediately. Of course they didn't, and Oppos believed the story. We were grounded for an entire week. But that and Oppos, that's not the part that still haunts me. 2 nights later, I woke up sometime after midnight. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard it. Click, click, click. The unmistakable sound of a hand-crank flashlight. My flashlight, the one I had dropped inside the haunted house. The sound was coming from outside my bedroom window. Slowly, I sat up. A faint beam of light slipped through the gap in my blinds. Click, click, click. Someone was cranking it. Right outside. My heart nearly stopped. I forced myself to look. The instant I pulled back the blinds, the sound ceased. The light vanished. Outside was nothing but darkness. No person, no movement, no flashlight, nothing. To this day, I tell myself it was only a nightmare. But deep down, a question still keeps me awake. If that flashlight was left inside the house, who was standing outside my window that night? My friend was so terrified she couldn't and Oppos to even finish what she was saying. According to her, After hearing the sink turn on by itself, she assumed I was trying to scare her. But when she stepped out of the stall, the restroom was completely empty. At least, that in Apo's. That's what she thought. One of the stalls near the back was locked from the inside. She called my name. No response. Thinking someone else must have been in there, she cautiously approached the stall and looked down through the gap beneath the door. There were no feet, no shoes, no sado, nothing. Yet she could hear a woman softly humming from inside. A low, eerie melody that sounded strangely old-fashioned. The humming continued for several seconds before abruptly stopping. That was enough for her. She rushed out of the restroom and practically ran back to class. When she burst through the classroom doors and saw me sitting at my desk, all the color drained from her face. After classes ended, we couldn't and Apo's. T stopped talking about what had happened. A few days later, one of the campus janitors overheard us discussing it and quietly pulled us aside. What he told us made the entire situation even more unsettling. According to him, the restroom in that particular building had a reputation among staff members. They avoided entering it after 5 and Apo's clock whenever possible. Rumors had circulated for years about a female spirit that supposedly occupied the stalls late in the evening. The janitor himself claimed he had heard strange noises coming from locked cubicles when nobody was inside. Whether the story was true or not, I can't Apo's, T say, but from that day forward, my friends and I made one rule. Never use those bathrooms after 5 p.m. To this day, I still don Apo's. T know if my friend encountered something supernatural or if there was a logical explanation. All I know is that the fear in her eyes looked very real. And that wasn't Apo's, T the last disturbing experience I would hear about. A few months ago, while serving as a missionary in Japan for the Mormon Church, I found myself in a situation that was far more terrifying than any ghost story. I had been living in Japan for nearly 2 years, and my mission was coming to an end. My final assignment placed me in Kyoto, one of the most beautiful and historic cities in the country. It was a place I had dreamed of visiting my entire life. One evening, my companion and I were going door-to-door speaking with residents about Christianity. Most people politely declined. Some ignored us completely. Then we arrived at an aging apartment building tucked away down a narrow side street. The structure looked neglected and worn down by decades of use. We climbed to the second floor and knocked on one of the doors. After a few moments, a middle-aged man opened it. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, and he wore an awkward smile that never quite reached his eyes. We introduced ourselves and asked if he would be interested in hearing our message. Instead of answering, he invited us inside. Normally, that would have been encouraging. The moment I stepped through the doorway, however, every alarm bell in my head started ringing. The apartment smelled overwhelmingly of urine, alcohol, and marijuana. The entire place consisted of a tiny entryway, a bathroom, a cramped kitchen, and a single room that served as a bedroom and living room combined. The atmosphere felt oppressive, uncomfortable, wrong. The man sat us at a low table and immediately began ranting. At first, his words seemed random. Then his tone darkened. He started talking about how much he hated Christians, how he couldn't Apo's, stand them, how he wanted to hurt them. My companion and I exchanged nervous glances. The man was heavily intoxicated, slurring his words and drinking continuously as he spoke. We silently prayed the conversation would and Apo's escalate. Then he leaned forward and smiled. End quote. I and Apo's. I'm going to tell you a secret, end quote, he said. End quote. You can end Apo's. Tell anyone, end quote. He reached beneath his bed and pulled out a large box. Inside was a staggering amount of cash. Stacks upon stacks of Japanese yen. More money than either of us had ever seen in one place. The bills appeared genuine. The man proudly explained that he was involved in illegal drug operations connected to the Yakuza. As soon as those words left his mouth, my stomach dropped. We realized something horrifying. If this man sobered up and remembered what he had just revealed, there was a very real chance he wouldn't into Apo's. He let us leave. The conversation dragged on for what felt like hours. Every time we attempted to stand up, he launched into another drunken rant. Eventually, we decided we couldn't and Apo's stay any longer. We thanked him, stood up, and moved quickly toward the door. The moment we did, his expression changed. Slowly, he rose from his seat and reached into another box beside the bed. I never saw what he was reaching for, and I didn't oppose. Want to? The second the apartment door closed behind us, we sprinted down the hallway. Neither of us spoke until we were several blocks away. Even then, our hearts were pounding. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if we and Oppos stayed another minute. Maybe he was reaching for something harmless, or maybe we escaped just in time. When I was 15 years old, I experienced something that still makes me uncomfortable whenever I think about it. I was home alone one evening, playing video games in my bedroom. For some strange reason, my room was located on the first floor, directly beside the living room. The house was quiet, completely quiet. Then I heard it. Top! A light knock against the living room window. I paused my game and listened. A few seconds later, another tap echoed through the room. Assuming it was neighborhood kids playing a prank, I walked through the dark living room and stepped outside. I checked the bushes beneath the window. Nobody. The yard was empty. Shrugging it off, I returned to my room. Less than 5 seconds later, top! This time I rushed outside. Again, there was nobody there. No footsteps, no laughter, no sign that anyone had been near the house. Annoyed, I decided to ignore it. As I walked back toward my room, another sharp knock struck the glass. Immediately, I spun around and ran to the window. Still nothing. No person. No movement. But then I noticed something. A strange shape near my feet. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Then my eyes adjusted. A dark figure was crouched directly beneath the window, completely motionless, close enough to touch my legs. I never saw its face. I never heard it move. 1 second it was there. The next, I was sprinting back to my bedroom faster than I had ever run in my life. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and hid beneath my bed while desperately trying to call my dad. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. Curled up beneath my bed, I called my dad and tried to explain what had just happened. At first, he thought I was joking. Then he heard the panic in my voice. I told him about the knocking, about the figure crouching beneath the window, about how it seemed to appear out of nowhere. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, he said something that only made me feel worse. End quote. Why didn't Oppos you call the police? End quote. Before I could answer, he told me he would do it himself. He ordered me to stay in my room, lock the door, and not come out for any reason. So I waited. The house felt unnaturally quiet. Every creak of the floorboards sounded amplified. Every shadow seemed darker than before. Then it started again. Top! A single knock against the glass. I froze. Top! Another one. The sound was coming from the same window, the same place where I had seen the figure. I held my breath and listened. For several agonizing minutes, the knocking continued. Slow, deliberate, almost as if whoever or whatever was outside knew exactly where I was hiding. Then, without warning, it stopped. Complete silence. No footsteps. No movement. Nothing. 5 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed across my bedroom walls. The police had arrived. I stayed in my room until one of the officers called my name. When I finally came out, they were already searching the property. Flashlights swept across the yard, the bushes, the side of the house, every possible hiding place. But they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had ever been there. What made it even stranger was the fact that every door was locked from the inside. Every window was shut. There was no obvious way anyone could have approached the house hidden beneath the window and disappeared so quickly without being seen. The officers eventually left, unable to explain what I had witnessed. My dad tried convincing me that it was probably just my imagination, maybe a trick of the shadows, maybe a prankster who got away before anyone arrived. But I know what I saw. That shape was real. It was crouching only inches from my feet, watching, waiting. And the part that still bothers me most, ISN and Oppos, the knocking. It and Oppos, that's the fact that when I looked down, the figure never reacted. It didn't in Oppos, run. It didn't in Oppos, move. It simply remained there in complete silence, almost as if it wanted me to see it. Years have passed since that night. Nothing similar has ever happened again. No more knocking. No more shadows outside the window. No unexplained visitors. Yet every now and then, when I and Oppos am home alone late at night and hear a branch tap against the glass, I find myself thinking back to that evening. Because despite all the explanations people have offered over the years, one question still lingers in the back of my mind. If someone was really hiding beneath that window, how did they disappear without leaving a single trace?